Today I am using Screencast-O-Matic to create a PechaKucha to share about my professional development experience as I travel to the National K-6 Literacy Conference in Columbus, Ohio. So I'm creating a PechaKucha because this is something we're thinking about using with our teachers in the future, and I wanted to give it a try. So I've compiled a variety of takeaways from the conference, and I'm just going to share with you slide by slide some of those most important takeaways and or how I'm thinking about using those with our teachers. So this first one here is just about being intentional in our teaching, and C.C. Bates talked about the importance of three components of that: close observation, collaboration and reflection, and professional knowledge and practice. So continually observing your teaching and thinking deeply about it, getting into the research, and then having time to collaborate and reflect with others. Then I went to a literacy luncheon, which was really awesome to get to meet with literacy coaches all across the country. They talked about 7 elements of effective professional learning, which mirror those that April talked about. They are focused on content, active learning, support for collaboration, models of effective practice, coaching and expert support, feedback and reflection, and sustained duration. And then this is just a quote that I really loved that talks about the importance of, in instructional coaching or any kind of coaching, respecting our teacher colleagues as a human first. That it's important to get to know their humanity and to respect and acknowledge that as we work with them. So that's from Denise Morgan. Another quote that I really liked that one of the PD facilitators said is she was talking about the importance of not positioning yourself as an expert as a facilitator. And so as she was talking about some research, she used this quote: "This is cutting edge in my thinking. I am in no way an expert." Just to invite others into the conversation, and I thought that was a really smart way of doing that. This part here talks about the Pareto principle, which is actually an Italian idea that came from socioeconomics and now is being applied to business and education. You've probably heard of this before. It's the idea that oftentimes we spend 80% of our time on trivial tasks that lead to 20% of our results, and we spend 20% of our time on the vital tasks that lead to 80% of the results. So what this is sharing with us is that it's really important that we prioritize our work and focus on the top 20% of our work that's going to have high value and the biggest impact on our teachers. So we need to be continually asking that question: what makes those powerful 20% of instructional decisions and experiences? There are a lot of reasons that we do professional learning. Some of these I thought were just important ideas to be thinking about. So you can see them here on the slide, but learning in general, and especially literacy learning, is really complex. It's important to socially construct knowledge, so if we can do that in a professional learning space, that's good for colleagues. Attention, motivation, and situation need to be in harmony for learning to be productive. Opposing views are seen as strengths rather than hurdles towards seeking solutions. Adult learning is a solution-seeking endeavor, and the universal conditions of learning need to be in place for optimal learning to occur. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those universal conditions shortly. This was a strategy that they used. It's basically the think, pair, share, but I like that it started with 3 Ps. So after giving some information, if you want teachers to talk with one another, you might say pause, ponder, and partner. One of the things that we should be asking our teachers, particularly as we think about the Pareto principle, is, out of all the things that I do as a coach, what is most helpful for you? Because that can help us to set our priorities and emphasize those things that are most important to our teachers with our time, or at least do those things first. And then they talked about, in one of the PD sessions I was in, 8 universal conditions of learning. This comes from an Australian researcher named Brian Camborne, And he studied literacy in particular, but talked about how these 8 conditions actually transcend all forms of learning, both student learning and adult learning. And there's a lot more information out there about these. And I just like to think more about them and particularly think about how we compare them with the timeline of expertise we do with our teachers as we think about the 4 stages of learning and how we move toward conscious competence in our learning. And then another thing that I learned at this conference is the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. It's kind of funny that they don't use the short G in andragogy. But andragogy is actually the study of the art and science of working with adults, unlike pedagogy, which is the study of or the art and science of working with children. So there are 5 assumptions about adult learners, and it's important that we honor those assumptions in order for adults to feel like they're in a really quality learning experience. So those are there. First, that we need to honor their self-concept, as well as their experience and expertise that they bring to the table. That their readiness to learn actually increases over time, and so then they're actually more open to learning when they're treated with respect and honored as experts. That the orientation to the learning is more about application. How can you immediately apply your learning as opposed to applying your learning maybe sometime down the road? And then that adults actually have a great internal motivation to learn, so we can capitalize on that. A little more about that. There are 4 principles of andragogy created by this guy named Knowles, and he suggested these 4 principles that we need to involve adult learners in both the planning and evaluation of their instruction. That adult learning should be problem-centered rather than centered around that content. That adult learners' experience provides the basis for learning activities, so we build on their current experience levels and expertise. And then that adults are most interested in learning about things that have an immediate relevance to their jobs and or personal lives. Conversations matter, and one of the things I talked about in the coaching session that I went to is 7 guideposts for effective coaching conversations. And these are what they are. The first one is to develop common language with the person you're working with. The next is to ask honest why questions. What are you genuinely curious about? The third is share personal teaching experiences to connect without oversharing. And then 4, ask what if questions to help encourage that sense of wonderment. 5 is a literacy coach is not an expert, but that we do have expertise, and that's a good way to position ourselves. 6, we should constantly reflect on whether we are assisting or assessing performance. Our questions either do one or the other, and it's okay to do both as long as we're aware of that, and so is the teacher we're working with. And then number 7 is if you know the answer to a question, don't ask it. Really liked this quote about expertise. The minute coaches are positioned as experts, you are destined to fail. So just kind of let that sink in. So important for us to position ourselves as thinking partners and people who genuinely want to engage in the learning together with those people we're working with. I liked this introduction that one of the presenters gave. She just started out by sharing who she was with a simple kind of I am poem. So I wrote one of my own here, and I'm just thinking about using something similar as I might introduce myself, particularly in an open conference situation or a conference where people don't know who I am. This comes from Lucy Calkins. She was talking about the importance of reading and writing and all the amazing things that reading and writing does for us and opens doors to the world. And she said, what I regret most in my life are the failures of kindness. And she talked about how reading and writing helps us to become more kind. She also said reading and writing allows us to be real together, and that it's bigger than just academics. It's really about our humanity. And then I went to a session on phonics instruction. I was particularly interested in this because we're always trying to help our teachers think about how to integrate foundational skills into their units. And Lucy Calkins said that the time has come for different when it comes to phonics instruction. She talked about how phonics is foundational, but that the foundation isn't the whole building, and that the CCSS were actually created as a result of the study that phonics should not be taught totally in isolation, but should be taught with a rich focus on reading and writing, and be intentionally paired with reading and writing. So you might do 20 minutes of sole phonics instruction, but that you should systematically be teaching phonics within your reading and writing. And then here's another quote that I really loved. It was a session about literate identities. To acknowledge that the choices we make concerning all facets of curriculum and pedagogy are value-laden is to liberate ourselves from imposing our own values on others. In other words, knowledge has to be made problematic and situated in classroom social relationships that allow for debate and communication. And then as we're thinking about feedback with our teachers, I really liked this quote on feedback, which was really about feedback within the context of writing conferences for kids, but I felt like it really transferred to the work that we do with teachers. Effective feedback is descriptive in nature, specific, concise, and easy to understand. Effective feedback is motivating and empowering, and therefore engaging. And that comes from Dorfman and Dotery. And then finally, when I went to that literacy coaches luncheon, they had us just talking together about problems of practice and sharing ideas. And one of the things that I was really excited about was just the opportunity to share coaching books that we've read. So I just made a list of all of the coaching books that people suggested to me that I want to look into a little bit more. Of course, a lot of these are more classroom centered if you were coaching within a school. But I was particularly thinking about, like, what's the next coaching book I want to read, or what might be a coaching book that we could read as a team in the future. And so right now I'm interested in looking at this book called Coaching Conversations, Transforming Your School One Conversation at a Time. So I think I'll probably get that and see if that's something that we might want to read as a team in the future. So anyway, that's my reflection from the 2019 K6 Literacy Conference. And thanks for taking time to listen to my takeaways.